my money framework was that money was hard to come by. So it was like hard to get. You had to work really hard for it, and there was never enough, right? Like that was the story that I got. And there was a lot of complaining about working, right? Like working seemed hard. Not that they didn't appreciate work, but like it was challenging work. It was exhausting work. And they didn't get paid enough for it. So that's really what like was the conversation in my household. And then on top of that, like I remember the landlord coming to the door and saying like, "Hey, where's the rent?" Because the rent was late. I remember the Con Edison, which was the electric company here in New York where I grew up many years ago, would come to the door and say, "Hey, we're going to turn off your lights if you don't pay us right now." And my mom would write them a fake check. So, and she like the reason she did that, not because she planned on defrauding them, but really it was just to buy time. So she'd give them the check. So they'd leave with the check and they wouldn't turn off the lights. And then she'd have like another week or two, to get her next paycheck and pay down the lights. So it was always like sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? It was challenging. And then there were times where we were, using food stamps or other like government assistance. So that was my childhood. So and then I had movies that I was watching, right? And so the references from there was like, okay, what professions make a lot of money? And like from a very young age, I was very focused on, I need to figure out how to make money because making money takes away stress. Making money makes everything easier, right? Like I understood how important money is. That's why when people say like, "Oh, money doesn't matter to me," I'm just like, okay, well, you've never been poor. Because if you've been poor, you understand that money is very important, right? And you would never ever say, "Oh, I'm above money. Money doesn't matter to me," right? Like, yes, try not having lights or not having a roof over your head or struggling to eat, and then you'll never say that again. And you understand money is very important so that you can make ends meet.
Yeah, plus 1,000 on that one. I always tell people, it's like, listen, I've been poor. I don't want to go back. It's not fun. Like
Hello.
it's not good. It's not a good time.
Yeah.
So, when
Yes.
people want to know like why I'm so frugal and things like that, it's like, listen, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, don't need to go back.
Exactly. Not something
So
I want
as
to
you're,
experience again.
yeah. So as you're watching like these movies and getting these references to, okay, these are the things that do make money, and you've got the things going on at home. What does that start to look like? How does that actually start to influence you as maybe you're, say you're like looking at the end of high school, thinking about what you want to do with your life? And I'm also curious throughout all that, like sprinkling in, how did that scarcity mindset, you think, leave an imprint on you?
Yeah. Well, I just had a story that I was not good with money. That again, money was hard to come by, right? Like that definitely was having an impact. And so what it looked like was like one of the things that I was really drawn to was the law and being a lawyer. My mom would watch a lot of courtroom dramas. And so I'd be watching it with her and, there'd be like a lawyer in front of the judge and the jury and they're making a case for the little guy, and being paid well while doing it. So I'm like, oh, I can represent people who need my help, right? Like, so I'm helping people and I'd make some money, right? Because I understood that like doctors, lawyers, like there are certain professions that make good money, right? So that was the story that, oh, I need to become a lawyer. And I felt like it was something that was interesting to me, but also something that would make money. And then there was, when I was probably, I don't know, probably late high school, I was babysitting a little girl. Her name was Alana, and she lived in this really nice neighborhood, tree-lined street, huge house. And there was only 3 of them, right? And I was like, wow, this is such a big house for 3 people. Like, I didn't understand having extra square footage, right? Like, that wasn't a thing where I was from. So I would go and babysit her. So her dad worked from home, and I'd pick her up from school, walk her home, make her a snack, like basically just kind of take care of her from like 3 to 6 p.m. until her dad was done with his work for the day. And so she, I'd open the pantry and it's like every snack, and then open the freezer drawer and it's like the pizza rolls and all the things that like my parents were like, absolutely not, we're not getting that, because it was expensive, frozen food, Pop-Tarts. It's like all the stuff you want as a kid. We didn't have that in my house, but open the pantry and it's everything. And whatever she'd want to make, like we'd make 2 and I'd have 1 too. And it was just like amazing. Then they had this family calendar that had like all these activities that she was in and all the things that she was doing. And I was just like, wow. So I was really curious, like, what does her parents do for a living? That's the thought. Like, I wasn't jealous, like in a negative way. I was curious and like, oh, how can we get that for myself? What does that look like? And so I'd be like, what does your dad do? I was always trying to figure out when I saw people who probably were not wealthy, just middle class or upper middle class. I would say we were lower middle class and like teetered on, you know, and we had some bad years, but we were probably lower middle class for most of my childhood, in terms of income. And, you know, I would just always ask, like, what do you do? What do your parents do? Right. I was curious, like, what creates this kind of financial stability? Her father was a consultant, and I had no idea what that meant. But yeah, that's, you know, that's what it meant to me, is like become a lawyer. And that's what I did, right? I became a lawyer, and I became very focused on school, getting good grades, because I understood that getting good grades would translate to getting a good job and making good money. And so I was like focused on that trajectory so that I could have financial security for myself, but also for my mom, for, you know, people in my life as well.
When you do get that first big girl job, what does your personal finances look like? I'm assuming with your kind of scarcity background with money, you're saving as much as humanly possible and cutting corners wherever you can. Is that the case?
No. And the reason it was like there was not enough to save. You know, I definitely learned how to make a dollar out of 15 cents, which I learned from my mother, right? So I learned how to like shop the clearance racks or look for deals. And I think I still do that. My husband finds it annoying. He's like, stop looking for a deal and actually get what makes the most sense for us. And I'm like, but that's a deal, you know? I still love a deal. But yes, I learned how to make things happen with very little. Like, so I didn't necessarily deny myself things. I just figured out, like, I could go out to lunch with my friends, but I'd get like the cheapest thing and not order a beverage. You know, like I learned how to participate in things. I even like figured out how to go to study abroad and, you know, negotiate my financial aid so that it would cover it. So I still had experiences. I just figured out how to either get some kind of financial support or like lower my costs as much as possible. But I usually did not have enough for saving, or at least that was the story in my mind, right? Like that there was just not enough. So I graduate from law school, and my first job out is as a clerk, right? So a law clerk for a judge, which is a government position. You're not making the big salaries, but it's supposed to lead to a law firm position where you make the big salary. So I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to do this first. So I do that for a year. I was making $41,000 a year. I had the most amazing government health insurance, which I absolutely missed when I left. I missed that health insurance, but yeah, I, you know, worked that job, and, you know, I actually had a house because my now husband, but then boyfriend, we bought a house together, really inexpensive. Like he made most of the money. I was like interning and making good money as an intern, but there was this opportunity in the nicest neighborhood for this like really tiny little cottage. So we decided to make it happen. And I mean, I practically I jumped through all kinds of insane hoops to make that happen. And so we got into the house, and it was like, you know, we figured it out how to make it work. I always worked part-time all through school. And then I graduated and I got this job making $41,000 a year. So we rented the house out because it's like, it was too expensive to keep it. So we rented it out for a time, lived in a really low priced apartment. And I clerked for the judge for the year. And then after that, I had job opportunities, but it was during the 2008 recession. So like not a ton of like all those law firm jobs, you know, they would usually be hiring a class of like 60 new associates, and now they're hiring 15, right? So it's going to be like the best of the best. And so I didn't get one of those positions, and I had some jobs offered to me, but none of them were making a lot of money. So I was like, you know what? I'm already broke. So I already know how to be broke, you know? So like, might as well keep being broke and try my hand at starting my own law practice instead of getting comfortable with a really big salary and then having to drop back down, you know? So that was my strategy, is like, if I'm going to do it, just do it now. So I did my year-long clerkship, and then I went solo, much to my mother's chagrin.
Which the one thing you said earlier, I just had to comment on real quick, which was so funny to me, is like seeing the freezer drawer with all the things like you always wanted to try that you never got. I will never forget when I got some like scholarship money back in college, and I was like, I'm getting toaster strudels and pizza bagels. I've always seen them on TV, never had them. You boys getting some toaster strudels.
Yeah, that's luxury.
So that cracked me up.
Toaster strudel and pizza bagel, luxury.
But another thing you mentioned was like, yeah, I mean, I was like stretching the dollar. I wasn't really saving any because I couldn't, or at least that's the story I was telling myself. And I'm curious, like,
Yes.
when that kind of switched, where you realized actually there is enough here for me to maybe start squirreling away some in some way.
Yeah, I didn't have a practice of saving. I didn't even understand the practice of saving because that's not something that was happening in my household because they just never had enough. Like they barely had enough to just get by, let alone actually save. So I didn't have anyone teaching me like a saver's mentality. But it's interesting, right? Same childhood. My sister, hardcore saver, like saved a lot of money. And in fact, later on, when I became an entrepreneur, and I started hiring team. I mean, her savings account became my line of credit, right? That was like covering payroll some months when I was like, I'm not going to make payroll. Somebody's paying me late, which means now my team, blah blah blah. And I'm like, can I borrow from your savings account? And she would lend it to me. I'd cover payroll. Couple weeks go by, couple months go by, and then I pay her back with a little bit of interest. So it's like, I mean, I'm telling you, this business would not exist today if it wasn't for her line of credit, right? My personal line of credit, which was her savings account, because she never touched that money. She would just save, 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 but never touch it. So it kept growing. And now she actually works at my company. She's my marketing director now. So it really wasn't until I got further along in my business where I was like making really good money in the business that I was like, oh, I'm in a position to save. And so I took a class on investing. I wanted to understand, like, okay, what am I supposed to be doing with money? Because no one in my family had money. I had one wealthy aunt and uncle, and they didn't really talk about money. So even if you had money, no one talked about it, right? If you were poor, you were talking about it because you were like trying to figure out how to make ends meet. But if you had money, it was like, mum's the word. I just saw the wealth, and they always got us really nice Christmas gifts, and things like that. But like, I never actually understood it. So no one taught me about it. So I sought out an education on saving, on personal finance, on learning how to invest. I literally was like, okay, so like in the class, I was embarrassed because I had to raise my hand and be like, okay, so how do you actually buy stocks? Like, where do you go? Like, I didn't know what website do you go to, or, how do you do it? I really had no idea. And this is like several years into my entrepreneurial journey. So I was good at making money. I started to save, but for what I was making, I could have been saving a whole lot more. I just didn't have the practice of it. And I was trying to get to a place, I think sometimes this happens where, and I read this great book and it was talking about how like, once you make it, you're just going to have this period. He called it the flash period where you're just going to blow money, right? Like you've never had it before, right? For you, it was pizza rolls and toaster strudel, right? For me, it was like buying a nicer house, for myself and my kids and my husband. So, you're going to do that where you get nicer clothes and blah, and you have like lifestyle creep. And so I had that for probably spent a year or two doing that. And then after a while, you're like, actually, I don't want anything else. It's really, there's nothing else that I need in my lifestyle. So then you start like squirreling away a ton because you have so much to put away. So that was really the trajectory there. But it was, I didn't have a mentality of saving as a kid. So I didn't even think of it. When I started making money, I was like, great, my kids could go to a better school. I'm going to get a house. Like, I'm going to do all these things. And I was making investments, like spending on smart things, like not, Gucci everything, right?
Yeah.
But still, I could have saved more, but I just didn't even think that was something that I needed to do.
And how high had your income climbed, if you don't mind sharing, to that point when you started taking your finances seriously? Because I think a lot of people think, especially if they come from maybe more impoverished backgrounds, that making more money solves everything. But I'm sure we all know
Yeah.
people who are making multiple six, even seven figures, who are living paycheck to paycheck. It's kind of
Yes.
scary. So how high had you climbed in the entrepreneurial ranks before you started taking the personal finance side of things seriously?
I definitely had a 7-figure business. So I wasn't
Wow.
necessarily taking home 7 figures, but my revenue was 7 figures. And I've always had a team. I was never one of those like lifestyle solopreneurs. I always believed in building a team and really building a business that could be an asset. So I always had a team. So I had business expenses, but I still was taking home like multiple 6 figures before I figured out. And those were my flash years, right? Where I was like, I'm going to buy everything because now I have money. It's just like so exciting. And then I was like, okay, I have enough. And now I want stability and security. So then that became more of a priority. And is really cool because once you figure out how to do it, then, then I started having other things like book deals and things like that. So all that extra income, I would just always put it in my, portfolio account, which is really exciting. So just watching it grow, it became like sort of like you got the high from being able to buy things that you could never do as a kid. And then, after a while, that goes away and becomes less of a priority. And then you get the high from like, oh, look at my bank account growing, or look at my stock portfolio growing. Like that's exciting too.
I'm kind of curious, like that's, your perspective of like, oh, this is exciting. I'm going to see this portfolio grow now. But obviously, or I assume that some of those changes meant a little bit of waterfall effect for maybe like the kids or the husband or whatever, like where it's like, okay, now mom's not just like throwing money around on all of us as well. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, like if that was true, was there any kind of like resistance or like, oh, what's going on now? We're not just spending money on everything. Now we do actually have to talk about what we're going to, what we're going to spend money on before we just go do it.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I think I was always very like efficient with my use of money. So I definitely wasn't wasting money. I mean, I'm sure some of the things I bought could be considered a waste. But I was mostly like investing in real estate, or, investing in things that actually help me perform better, like getting a personal trainer or my kids going to a really great school. That gave me peace of mind. And I know that they're, it's an investment in their education, their future, or getting nicer clothes because I was speaking on stage all the time and I would feel more confident. So it was those kinds of events, even like getting I remember the first like press thing I did where this news crew came to my house and I hired a makeup artist to do my makeup at home. That was like my first time ever having my makeup done at home, which was a big deal. So it's like, those were the kinds of things. It's like, even when I was spending money, it was always with the idea of like, I'm going to make money from this in some way. So I never was like I don't think I was throwing money around in a bananas way for the most part. But certainly could have been saving and investing more. But my kids, like basically our lifestyle at that point was so comfortable, they wouldn't have noticed, right? If I was squirreling away more, it was like more like vacations and stuff. Plus all of this happened, like it's leading up to COVID. And then in COVID, we were in our houses for 2 years. So, it was like all that, I don't know, probably 2017, I think was my first $1 million year. And then, probably 2017 to 2018 were my like wild and crazy years. And then 2019 happened and then COVID, we're in the house. So it was, it was like in that same time frame. But the kids, like their needs were always met. And like if they wanted to do extracurricular activities, they were doing it. Probably the only thing I'd want to rein in with my husband is he loves cars. So he likes to like have a nice car, have more than one nice car. And he wanted to invest in getting a nice car and I was very against it. And I fought him on it tooth and nail. And then eventually I gave in. So.
So it's not like your kids were saying, Mom, why aren't we taking the Lambo to school? Why do we have to take the minivan this week?
They never care. Like that's the cool thing about kids. They don't care. They don't know the difference. They do like daddy's cool cars. Like they do really love that. But it was my son, I will say my 10-year-old, he's the bougiest child I've ever met. So now that he's been to like 5-star hotels, if we walk into like a 4-star hotel, it'd be like, oh, I thought we were staying in a nice hotel. Like this is nice. I'm like, oh my God, I've created a monster. But yeah, other than like fancier vacations, that's probably the only place that they would actually notice. Like, so we might still go on vacation, but I'm not like throwing money at the nicest hotel or whatever. I'm always like, okay, what's actually making sense for us? Because sometimes the nicest hotel is not comfortable for children, So getting just more strategic about vacations and things like that. And then now, one of my favorite things is like we use the Amex for all of our business expenses so that we get a ton of miles. And we just pay it off every month. So we get a lot of miles so we never have to pay for, airfare and that kind of thing. So they've gotten used to flying first class, which I barely ever pay for. It's usually just points. So like there is some things that I've done that have made them kind of bougie kids. So so yeah, they've definitely, but they understand like I talk to them about money because no one did in my house, right? Unless it was like I overheard conversations with stress. So when we're talking business or we're talking about money moves or we're talking about investing, We want them sitting right there. We want them listening and learning and absorbing those lessons.
That's awesome. I feel like these habits are what make entrepreneurs so successful is when they have that go-getter attitude and they can
Yes.
scale a business, but they also kind of have that frugality. I know you said you're still like hunting for deals. You're still, thumbing through the clearance rack and you're still trying to, figure out how you can get your points to go the farthest. Even though you're being humble, you're an 8-figure entrepreneur. You could spend $1 million a year and probably still have a pretty good savings rate, which is just incredible that you're still passing down a lot of these values to your kids.
Yeah, exactly. I'm definitely not cheap, but there are certain things that I am pretty frugal about. So I think it's a balance because I also understand like instead of buying the cheap thing, I can buy the higher quality thing and then I don't have to replace it as often. So sometimes it's just thinking about it's not the cheapest thing is not always the most frugal thing, you know?
Yeah, you're spending on value, not just the
Yes,
cheapest thing possible. Something that's
exactly.
actually would be really interesting to talk to you about because you help women, you help minorities, you help everyone scale their businesses, make more money. But the make more versus spend less kind of debate, because I think we talked about this 10 minutes ago. There are entrepreneurs who are 7-figure entrepreneurs who just spend it all. They have nothing to show
Yes.
for it and they just spend it as fast as it comes in. And then there's also people who are making $50,000 a year and they're saving, $20,000 a year. Where do you kind of
Yes.
fall on this, like spend less versus earn more? Like when you're coaching someone, when someone comes to you, they're living paycheck to paycheck right now. Maybe they have a business, maybe they're in a W-2. Where do you have them start? Like what are your words of advice on the, make more versus spend less continuum?
Oh, I'm 100% team make more all the way. And what I do with them is I actually have them run the numbers. So I'm like, okay, how much money do you need to make every month to not be living paycheck to paycheck, to be able to like save some money and invest, to be able to cover the expenses that you have, to be able to cover your maybe like you want a nicer place to live, or maybe you want extracurriculars for your kids. Like, what do you actually want? And then let's run the numbers on that. And a lot of times it's like if I made another $10,000 a month, it would be life changing and I'd be able to check all these boxes. Or if I made another $20,000 a month, sometimes it's $100,000 a month. It doesn't matter what the number is. So I'm like, okay, this is the target because it gives you a why. Why am I working to grow this business? It's so that my kids can go to the best school. It's so that I can pay my mom's rent, right? It's so that I have more money to put away for retirement. So it's like, you know why you're doing this and what the benefit is. And then you're like, okay, now I'm motivated. What do I need to do? And then we have a specific target instead of just kind of growing and being like, let's see what happens. You can say, okay, I'm growing to this specific level, and that's going to be my version of living like a millionaire, right? Because I'm going to have all of the things that are priority to me. And so that's what I do with them. And then once we figure out what those numbers are, then the next step is, okay, now let's brainstorm what kind of offers can we make? What tweaks can we make to the business model? Where can we find the opportunity to increase your income by whatever that gap is between what you're making now and what you want to be making? I actually think I mean, maybe in some ways it feels easier to cut expenses, but that's not exciting and fun to me. I'd rather have like the let's make more money and let's see what we can do. And I think what happens is once you earn more, you're like, oh, this is actually not as hard as I thought it was. Because I think there's a story in our society collectively that making money is hard, right? That certainly was a story that I grew up with. And I want to reframe that. I want people to start to believe that making money is actually easy. And if you look for opportunities or you look for evidence of that, you can see it all around you that there are some very easy ways to make money, like buying stocks and just waiting. That's an easy way to make money, or creating a program or course one time and people buy it over time and you make money from that. Or one of the easiest ways is like whatever you do in your day job, if you're marketing or if you're an accountant, get some clients on the side, right? And have some clients as a side hustle selling the service that you are skilled at and an expert at. That's an easy way to make a couple grand a month, on a recurring basis. So making money is actually not hard. I think it can be quite easy if we study it and are willing to learn. So I'm definitely team make more money, get what you want.
Love it.
One of my favorite pieces of content that, when I was looking through your stuff was this, like the 13 lessons in 13 years. And the conversation we just had kind of reminded me of one of the lessons, which was like, if you had $1 million right now, like what would you do with that? Starting to think about like, okay, what am I actually going to do with this money to get excited about it? I love that one.
Yes.
Another one that was on there that reminded me of what we were just talking about is, around earning more money, which is whatever you're thinking about charging, double it. Like I'm
Yes.
curious, and I think I know the answer. Like, what percentage of people you're working with are just charging way too little, and kind of what's your advice for them?
Yes, I would say probably like 80% of my clients undercharge. And it's so funny because my community has started to call it the Rachel Rodgers effect, like that I'm like this creator economy that is around my business, like prices have gone up. It's like because it's like don't coach them because if you coach them, then my prices, what I gotta pay is gonna go up. Um, because it's true. I think money is also very much related to our identity, our how we value ourselves, what we think our ideas are worth, right? What we think our creativity and our services are worth. And I think that that's why we undercharge. It's like, well, I'm not, no one's going to pay that to just hire me. And I'm like, why not? Right? We are actually priceless, right? There's no number because there's always a target market who you would solve the problem for. For them, it's worth the money, right? An example of this is when I was practicing law, I was charging like, I think, $750 for a trademark application. And I had another Black woman lawyer who messaged me and was like, you're way undercharging. You need to raise those prices. At least double it, is what she told me. And I was like, get out of my business, right? Like, that was my first reaction. I didn't say that to her, but that's what I was thinking. And then I was like, maybe she's right. And maybe I'm undervaluing myself because I'm a newer lawyer. Just because I don't have 10 years of experience doesn't mean I am qualified to do the work, right? So I'm not experienced, but I'm qualified. And so had her and another lawyer told me you're undercharging. And just because you're a new lawyer doesn't mean you should charge rock bottom prices. And so they gave me the courage. And so what I did was the next client that called, he needed like a trademark, whatever, registration. And so I was like, I'm just going to quote the price to him. I'm not going to tell the world that I'm raising my price. I'm just going to tell the next person who calls. So he calls and he's like, we have the conversation, the consult, and then it gets to the price and he says, how much? And I'm like, 1,500. And I just like wince and just like pause and just try not to say anything because I'm like freaking out inside. And he's like, okay, I'll take 2. And he did. I made $3,000. And I was like, oh, that's the price now. Like once you get one person you prove the concept, right? One person's willing to pay it. And it's so funny because then I later, like probably a year later, I made friends with another attorney who was charging $15,000 per trademark registration because that's the level of clientele that he had where it was such a priority to them. I don't know. I don't even understand, but he was charging them 15 grand. And I was like, wow. And I have to say, I've been in so many different spaces with very successful entrepreneurs in so many different industries, tech, everything else. And the thing that I've heard the most consistently is like, what is the difference that took you from an 8-figure to a 9-figure business? Or what's the difference that took you from a 7-figure to 8-figure business? And every time we raise the price, literally. And it's a mindset thing. Like we have fear, like, oh, if I raise the price, I'm going to lose all my customers. No, you're not. They're just going to pay the extra. And sometimes it's $20. And it's like, just you raise the $20, but you have 10,000 clients. It makes a huge difference, right? Or you raise it by $500, or even for me, right? I went from $750 to $1,500. I've raised my prices many times over the years for a variety of different things, and I always still have customers. Like I've never not had customers for any of, and I've always had a lot of customers. So I think people want to undercharge because they think, oh, it will sell itself. I won't have to work that hard to sell it because it's cheap. And it's like, even if you want $5 from me, I'm like, what you giving me for this $5? Right? Like, you can't just have my $5. What do I get in exchange for this $5? Right? So you're going to have to sell it. If you sell it for $5, 5,000, 500,000, whatever the price is, you got to be a salesperson. So there's no skipping that part. So like, understand who your client is, understand the problem that you solve, why you're good at it. You got to be able to sell the thing and transfer that enthusiasm and confidence, right, in your ability to solve that problem for them. And then people will be like, I like you. I want to work with you. I believe you can help me. And they'll pay your price, or they won't. And it's like, okay, on to the next,
So it sounds like you were crushing it in law. You get some advice from this other woman. You double your prices. It sounds like you doubled your prices and doubled your prices. And at some point, you're charging probably a lot more for that original $750 trademark. But then you
Yeah.
pivot out of law. What's the rationale behind that decision? It sounds like you had already built a multi 7-figure or maybe 8-figure empire at that point.
Yeah. No, I got to almost 7 figures in my law practice.
Okay, and that was like the
And
2016, 2017 when you were balling out for a couple years?
no, this was pre
Okay.
that. So this is like 2014, 2015.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
making good money in my law practice. I'm making like $700,000 a year. And I've got one attorney, like one full-time, one part-time, an assistant, right? So small team. And we're doing okay. And I see there's opportunity, right, to scale, like, because I'm becoming more well-known. But I discovered that I really love running the business. I love the marketing. I love the selling. I love like figuring out the business model, figuring out what to offer next, right? What the next move is, creating operational efficiency. I love all of it. I hate practicing law. So every day I'd be like, if there's like a filing deadline, I'm like getting the thing in at 11:30 p.m., right? There's like a midnight filing deadline. So that I was procrastinating all the legal work. I did it at an excellent level, but it just was not bringing me joy, right? I'm like, as you can see, like I like to talk, I like to be with people, and practicing law required me to like be at my computer, drafting contracts and all that for hours. I loved the part of business where I was managing a team, where I was talking to customers, where I was doing marketing, but I didn't like the part where I was like hiding behind my computer and like drafting contracts. Like I enjoyed that, I enjoyed the strategy of it, but I really started to just really dislike practicing law. And I went on a retreat. And on that retreat, I was telling this coach that was part of the retreat that I think it was like the first time I admitted out loud that I actually hate doing the legal work, because I had to get up the courage to admit it to myself and then somebody else. And then I finally did. And she was like, okay, so do something else. And I'm like, well, I can't do anything else. Like, this is what I've trained to do. She's like, of course you can. And so one of the things that people always ask me for is business coaching, because they're like, okay, how did you grow your practice like this? How do you have so many clients? Teach me how to do it. And I would teach my clients, like my legal clients, how to do it for free. Right. And so she's like, start charging for the business advice. And so it took me 2 years to transition, winding down the law practice, winding up business coaching. And that's how I moved into it. But it was just like, I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And I was like sort of at a plateau. Like every year I'd make maybe $100,000 more, but I wasn't growing it as much as I thought I could. And I just realized it's because I really didn't want to do the work. Like it's like you want to grow, but you're like, actually, I don't want that legal client because then I'm going to have to do the work. So I just felt limited by law, and I wanted to talk about business and other things. And so, yeah, that's why I did that transition. And it was fascinating. The following year, my first full-time year doing business coaching, I hit 7 figures.
Wow.
So I do think that there's definitely a connection between doing something that you're lit up about and excited about, and you do it for free, and getting paid to do it. You don't have to have so much discipline because you're just excited, and like you don't need discipline. You're naturally motivated to do it because it's such a match for your natural talents. I think if we all can hone in on like what our natural talents are and we make money from that, that's where our best opportunity to make the maximum amount of money is.
So you made this transition from law to business coaching, and you honed in on that, like what you truly love. The other thing, at least as of today, that you've kind of honed in on is your target audience, where you're helping women, you're helping people who are underserved. Was that like the strategy from the get-go? And if you had to give any advice to somebody who's trying to figure out their audience and maybe if they need to
Yes.
niche down, how did you go through that? How did you decide, I'm not just going to coach anyone who's willing to pay me, or that's not going to be my focus. My focus is going to be this specific type of help.
Yes. Well, it was really like part of it is if you've had a business for a while, you look back and say, okay, who have I served so far? Who's coming to me? And of those, who are my favorites, right? Like who are the ones that I really love working with? And then also who are the ones that spend the most money? And you kind of look for the overlap there. And that's how you can kind of hone in on who is my ideal client. Like they pay the most money. I love working with them the most. It's a win-win, right? So how can I find more of those and say no to the other types of clients? So that's one way to think about it. For me, it was also like, what was pissing me off, right? Like, what was I mad about? And what I was mad about is like, I would go to these conferences and these events and, it would like, I'd learn so much. It'd be great. No women in the group, no women of color, right? No people of color at all. Everybody who was a speaker was a white guy, right? And a straight white guy, right? Like, so it's just like no representation of other identities. And that annoyed me. And sometimes I'd talk to the conference leader and say like, hey, how come there's not more diversity? Like, how can we get more women here? This is a great event. How can we get more people of color here? And you could kind of tell, like, they talked to me about it, but they kind of didn't care. It just wasn't a priority for them. It wasn't their target market. And so after, honestly, a couple of years of this, I just got pissed and mad. And I was like, I'm going to create it myself because I'm annoyed. you know? The other thing that I saw is that, like, for women in particular, all of the business training geared towards women was like, get to six figures, make six figures. I had made six figures and I was like, I could use more, right? Like with kids and a mortgage and all the things, six figures actually doesn't go as far as they claim it does, particularly when it's like six figures plus you got to pay business expenses, then you got to pay taxes, then you get to pay yourself, right? And so I was annoyed that, like, I wanted to learn how to have a 7-figure business and there was nothing out there. And so that's how I decided, okay, I'm going to focus on people from historically excluded backgrounds and really prioritizing their experience and their challenges and teach them specifically how to grow an audience and how to grow. And what's funny is, like, we definitely have straight white guys that are part of our community, that are beloved members of our community, but it's like, there's so much diversity and every identity is celebrated, so it doesn't matter, and also every identity is on the stage. We have an annual conference and there's people who have a disability. There's queer people, there's non-binary people, right? Like, there's just every identity, every type of person of color is represented. So no one feels like the only, because that's how I used to feel going into those conferences. Like, I'm the only Black person here. I'm like one of the few 3 women here. And so I wanted a place that felt inclusive, but also really great, hard-hitting, strategic business advice. And so since it didn't exist, I just decided to create it.
And I think that's really cool because kind of like when you were, younger and you were babysitting, you got to see that it was possible. It's like someone else was making
Yes.
money. And I think that what you're doing is allowing other people who had never seen anyone that looked like them to see it's possible. And I always tell people all the time, like,
Yes.
coming from like a lower income background, like, that's the hardest part and the biggest advantage that I feel like other people around me now as I'm an adult and I see people that they had, is that from an early age, they knew it was possible. And it took a lot of my life
Yes.
to just even know that it was possible. So I think that's really cool.
Awesome. Yes. That's exactly why, so just so you know, like, you can do it, right? Someone has paved the pathway to make it possible for you. I love it.
So Justin and I know our strengths and we know our weaknesses. And I shared before we hit record here, one of the reasons we're excited to have you on is because you bring a different background. You bring a different perspective. And Justin and I are 2 straight white guys. So who do you think we attract? We have a lot of straight white guys, I'm sure, who listen to the podcast, and white women as well. What are some unique challenges that maybe your community faces that we might not even think of? And I'm sure we do have not just straight white guys in our audience. So would love to speak to them and have with your different and unique perspective on that. Like, are there any specific challenges or just mindset things? Like, maybe this is a good example that
Yes.
Justin was just sharing. Any things like that maybe they don't come up as a cis man or woman, white
Yeah.
cis man or woman, yeah, especially.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, like, one of the things for sure is obviously a lot of discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia, right? Like, ableism. So that's something that they experience that is just not acknowledged, right? So sometimes you go into spaces where they're like, oh, just do this or just do that, the advice that they give you. Or it's kind of like, raise a friends and family round. And it's like, I'm making the most money out of all my friends and family. Like, there's no friends and family round happening. Or it's like, go to the bank and get a loan. But all the stats show when you're a woman, when you're a person of color, you're less likely to get a loan. You have to show so much more paperwork. And I've experienced this myself, and so many people from my community have experienced this. I even did this when I had a financing partner who was, basically a place that people could get longer term payment plans through. And then, it worked for a little while. Then they started denying like 80% of my audience. And I started to realize, like, oh, they're literally doing the exact same discrimination. And there's all kinds of studies and stats that shows this is true, right? So, one of the things is, like, I understand that they need money to finance even just being able to be an entrepreneur. So I teach them how to have a side hustle, keep your day job, make money on the side, right? I teach them how to make money first versus audience. I talked about this recently with Cody Sanchez, where she teaches people, have an audience first, build up an audience over a long period of time, then make offers to them after you've built trust. And I'm like, my people cannot do that. They need to make money as quickly as possible, right? It's a priority. It's urgent for them. So, like, we flip it, make money from the people who already know you first, then focus on building the audience. So it's like, those are some of the nuances, and even things like accents, right? That they're like, oh, I'm scared to do videos on social media because, people make fun of my accent, or I my name is not a common name, or just different things that, like, mindset stuff Because when you have all of that happening in society, and it's literally systemic, it's built into our systems. What happens is the person starts to feel like they're not worthy, right? And it becomes internalized where they don't think they're good enough to ask for more money or to have their own business or have somebody invest in their ideas. And so all of that is stuff that we are doing in the mindset work that we do, and also teaching them how to build a business in a way that will work for them with no access to capital, because that is a huge issue for pretty much everybody that's not a straight white guy, unfortunately. And I know it's going to change over time, and it's slowly changing, but it's so incremental and it's like at a snail's pace. So what can we do regardless of that? So that's what I'm teaching. And that's what I talked about in my book. It was all about like, okay, I know that this is happening. I want to acknowledge that this is part of your experience, because that's part of the problem too. Not having it acknowledged pisses people off. It pisses me off, because we're not starting from the same platform, right? We're starting a different, like I'm back here, right? When the shooting goes off, I got some space to cover just to get to the same spot as you. Then I could go, right? So acknowledging it, but then also teaching them where their power is, right? And that you have power. What is within your control so that you can change your situation.
And going along with what Cody mentioned, the number one thing we want to do is to learn from people who have advice that we can't really relate to or that we couldn't have on our own. Like that's the funnest part, is learn from somebody with a completely different perspective. And another one of the things from the 13 lessons in 13 years that I saw that I'm like, this is something I could never help the audience with because I don't have kids and I don't ever plan on having kids. But it mentions that like having children can actually make you more ambitious and successful. I became a millionaire because of my kids, not in spite of them. And since that's something, again, like me and Cody could never give that advice to the audience. So we'd love to get that from you.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. I had a lawyer tell me many years ago when I was pregnant with my first child, she was like, children bring luck, like they bring abundance. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to tuck that in. I don't see how, but okay. But it motivates you, right? Because if you have a strong why, that's the thing that's going to get you to do the things that you're afraid of, put yourself out there when you don't want to, right? Like face the fears, be courageous, ask for the sale, all of those things. When you have bills to pay, there's no room for fear, right? Like when you're like, I got to take care of these kids, I got to pay for this preschool, I got to pay for this mortgage, I'm going to ask for the sale. I'm shook, but I'm still going to ask for the sale because I need to pay these bills. So it creates a higher level of motivation. The other thing is you become efficient as hell, right? Like the level of efficiency that you figure out. I figured out exactly what time to wake up. I used to wake up at 4:30 in the morning so I could beat because my kids, like when they were little, like 2 years old, the moment my feet hit the side of the bed, they were like, mommy's up, right? Like then I'm in mom mode, right? And I wanted a few minutes in the morning to like work on my stuff, work on the business, work on creating, like writing blog posts back in the day. That's what I was doing then. And so I figured out I was like, all right, 6:30, they're going to wake up. So let me try 6. Nope, that doesn't work. 5:30. No, 5. And I would just keep getting up. And I got up at 4:30 in the morning. And I would have like an hour and a half or 2 hours to work on writing my blog post, going to work out, come back, they wake up, do my mom mode thing, then go to work, right? And it's just like figuring out how to use every minute of the day and waste nothing in terms of time. Same thing with money, right? Just being efficient as possible, which is something when you're trying to scale a business, lack of efficiency will absolutely kill your profit margins, right? So it's one of those things that really translates to business, and being, learning how to, do more with less is a great skill set. So I think it really helps in terms of motivation, in terms of efficiency, in terms of responsibility, leadership. I mean, there's so much that's happening. Advocating for yourself, because I might like allow people to get away with stuff, but when it comes to my kids, hell no, right? I'm in mama bear mode. And so like I'm bolder, right? I'm more willing to negotiate. I'm going to tolerate less because I have to take care of these little people, So I think all of that actually becomes an advantage when you're a parent and an entrepreneur.
Love it. Well, we are coming up on our time here, Rachel. It has been an absolute honor. You're truly an inspiration. I love how you're kind of pioneering this path and showing people what's possible. I love your focus on intentionality too. I think I saw it in another clip where you just keep digging and digging with the question why. And then it's like once you kind of uncover all those whys, you're like, okay, now you can actually explain why you need the $15,000 a month because you want to send the kids to private school and swim lessons and yada, yada, yada. Like getting down to that is so important. I love that we were able to cover that in this episode. where do you want to direct people? I know you have so much stuff going on. You're like a blogger, podcaster, speaker, entrepreneur. You have like multiple books, audiobooks. You have a club. Like, you have so much stuff going on. Where do you want to send our listeners?
Yes. Well, I have a brand new Audible original. It's an audio only book that just came out. It's called Six Figure Side Hustle. So for folks who want to learn the pathway to go from, okay, I've got a full-time job. What's my step-by-step process? So it's a 10-step process to create your six-figure side hustle in 90 days. And it teaches you exactly how to do it. And there's great stories in there from entrepreneurs who have done it. So you have that motivation and that pathway. And that's available on Audible. So that's where I would tell people to go. And then follow me on Instagram. I'm Rachel Rodgers ESQ. I drop videos every day. So I'm always good for a rant, a motivational rant to start your day.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for giving us the time. I know you're a super busy person, and we talked before we hit record about all the different projects you got coming out. So definitely really appreciate you giving us the time, and I'm excited for the audience to hear this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.